I went into banking after graduation, and I knew I didn't want to stay in banking long term. I had planned on originally going into private equity, and through my research and long term career planning, I learned that certain private equity firms would require the MBA to advance. So kind of rather than applying while I was working and having to take the GMAT while working like 80 hours a week, I thought why not front load the effort of applying right now, and even if I don't get in, it won't hurt me later on. So that was kind of the catalyst to me applying. And I think an MBA is a good way to kind of expand your network, help you advance your career, allow you to take a vacation without slowing your career advancement. So a lot of benefits, but definitely not looking forward to be $250,000 in debt. So we'll see how that goes.
Great, thank you. Tony?
I think the appeal of the MBA for me, because I applied very last minute on a whim. And for me, I didn't apply to many schools. I was very particular about entrepreneurship. That is where I started, and that's where I hope to end up in again. And the only school that appealed to me were Stanford at the time, and I applied for Wharton as well. But I think it was two things. One was the entrepreneurial spirit at Stanford, and in the Bay Area in general. I love the West Coast. And then the other appeal was the fact that my company was going to pay for the MBA. So I was like, why not take the 2-year vacation, like Kevin said, if they're going to pay for it? So real talk.
Nice. Joseph?
Yeah. Why MBA? I think like Kevin and Tony both shared some really great reasons. I think I sort of see two aspects to it. One of it is like the actual education, and yeah, you can get an undergrad business degree from Haas, but I think there's also something to be said about getting some work experience and then learning about more deeply business and different business topics. Having that work experience, I think, can provide a lot more color and a lot more depth to what you learned in the classroom. And then sort of outside the classroom too, you have the opportunity to meet a lot of really smart, driven, interesting people from all walks of life, and they're all coming to these like really great business schools. And so I think it's just a really great opportunity to meet some really cool people and gain that diversity of exposure and thought, because you're meeting people coming from consulting and banking and entrepreneurship and tech and operations and marketing and all these different places. And so it's a great opportunity to just, like I said, get that exposure. And then like Kevin said, why apply senior year? I think like you don't really want to be doing it when you're working, however many hours a week you're working. And so it's just nice to get it done your senior year.
Cool. Thank you. So the next question would be, so what is it like to be a deferred admit? I know, Kevin, you're already moving to work for Harvard. How's your engagement with the school so far?
Yeah, engagement I think engagement is like mixed. Like I think when you're first accepted, a lot of these schools have like welcome events, both in person and online, and obviously everyone's very excited to be admitted. There's a specific like Slack for admitted the deferred students. It's not super active, but people on there are always willing to chat, and you get an easy list of people to reach out to, both in your cohort and in other deferred cohorts. I've been able to meet a handful of people in person that are in New York, and they've all been very cool, very friendly. But there's not like a ton of events going on like every month. So I think there'll be more kind of like interactions like as you get closer to matriculating.
Great, thank you. Tony, how's you work in SF and not so far away from Stanford. So have you get in touch with other admits or other GSB students, alumni yet?
Yeah, it's a very similar experience to Kevin. There's quite a bit of deferred candidates that decided to stay or come to SF, knowing that they are going to be here in 2 years. It's a very lively group, but in general, everyone has a very full-time job. Investment banking and consulting are not good hours, so we tend to meet whenever we can. That is one thing. So I was able to visit some of their workplaces and get to know various different roles, which is really cool. The other aspect of it, I would just say that it opens a lot of doors for you in terms of alum networks and groups outside of that deferred group that you're already able to tap into. And what's interesting is I keep hearing over and over again, the same response from various alum is, I wish I knew exactly what I was looking for coming into the program, but most of them don't. So they felt that their time would have been better spent if they knew exactly what they were getting out of it. So being deferred, I think, has that benefit that we can already explore and talk to some of these alums and figure out what their highlights of their days were, and also being able to tap into some of the experiences at events on campus. Me being so close is a benefit to that. And yeah, just tap into the network very early on and hopefully get a much better idea of the program by the time we start.
Thank you, Tony. Joseph, I know Wharton has the SF campus. Is any of your events happen to be there, or how your engagement with the school have been?
Yeah, that's right. We do have an SF campus. Over the summer, one of our events that we had was like a deferred admit meetup at the SF campus, and that was really cool. I got to meet some people I still hang out with. And so I'd say like Kevin said, it can vary, I think, person to person, and school to school, the amount of engagement you're going to have with these special events. But I've met a couple of really great people. And I think at least something kind of Wharton specific is that Wharton is a pretty big MBA class. And so you get pretty good representation here on the West Coast as well. And so that's been really nice.
Great, thank you. So my next question would be, I just got a question regarding GMAT, because this is kind of the very first step of prepping for applications, right? So I got the question how long you had to study for GMAT? And then any tips, any? Kevin, you want to start?
Yeah. So I guess this just depends on how good of a test taker you are. But I think the GMAT is a little bit harder than your SAT and ACT that you took in high school. I personally think you should give yourself depending on how your diagnostic test goes, give yourself a solid 3 months at least, in my opinion, if you're a shaky test taker. So I got a 600 on my diagnostic, studied for a month and a half, then got a 720. I do not think a month and a half was enough time. So I mean, but that's just one data point. And then some people, there are a lot of different test prep courses out there. I used a program called Target Test Prep and would highly recommend it. I think it's very comprehensive and is basically all you need if you wanted a all-encompassing test prep program.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Tony, I remember you told me you had 760. When is it first time trying it?
No, definitely not my first time, and you exposed me. I did it very, very awkwardly. So my first time trying was junior year, because I didn't have an SAT score because I was a transfer student. And my hypothesis was that I wasn't getting interviews because I didn't have a test score on my resume. So I went ahead and took the GMAT because it didn't make sense to go back and take SAT at the time. My score was not that high. So I had time in between that and when I took it last. So it was the second time that I was able to increase my score by quite a bit as well. So I would just say, like what Kevin said, it's a very very much like any other exams that you would take. It's knowing the content and just repeat practice and getting used to the format, I think, is really important.
Great, thank you. Joseph.
Yeah. How did I prepare for the GMAT? I used some free resources that the GMAC has online. I think like the best way to prepare for the GMAT is to honestly just do practice tests and identify topics that you might be a little shaky on that you haven't really practiced in the past few years, and specifically just study those. And then those live practice tests will help you, one, get used to what it's like to go through the gauntlet of a whole test, because it can be really long and really mentally draining. And then two, help you just get used to the types of questions that you're going to be asked. I will also say that a lot of these schools take both the GMAT and the GRE. If you think that another type of graduate school might be in your future, or you might be better suited for the GRE, then like definitely research and make sure that the schools that you're interested in will take either one. And personally, I would recommend taking like a diagnostic for each one, just to see like which one you resonate with more, sort of like the ACT, SAT dichotomy. But yeah, that's how I prepared.
Thank you. And then now we are going to touch the application portion. I know we just talked with a panel of admissions officer about resume, some cover letter, MIT, and an essay writing interviews. So what do you think is the hardest part in your experience? And what I know that there are some outside of campus resource, but did you ever use any campus resource? It can be just your peers, and then did you utilize those resources? Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. I think the hardest part are the essays, because I think, it's one of the last things like within your control within the application. So, definitely you should put like the most effort there. And, kind of really figuring out what kind of story you want to tell and how you want to portray yourself to the admission committees of all these schools. In terms of on-campus resources, admittedly, I probably didn't use as many as I probably could have. I know there's a lot of like good writing resources on campus. I kind of used I guess like the only thing I did was like I'd use a lot of friends to like proofread my essays and give me feedback. But other than that, not much else.
Thank you, Kevin. Tony?
Yeah, very similar to Kevin. I would say the most difficult part was realizing why you want to do an MBA in the first place and how you're going to put everything together. Stanford's question is very innocent because it seems so general and generic. It's like, what matters most to you and why? And then the second question is, why Stanford? They both seem really innocent and really easy, but then when you really dig deep into it, it's like, okay, what really matters to you is very different from person to person based on your upbringing and things like that. So one thing that really helped me was actually in terms of campus resource, I would say Court Worthington's class. What was it? UGBA.
191p.
Thank you. 191p. At a part of the course, he had us draw out our life story from the day you were born till now, and what that journey looked like. What decisions did you have to make on the way, and how did you get to here? So I drew that out, and I looked back at it and said, okay, along that journey, what mattered to me the most when I was making those critical decisions? And that's how I started crafting my essays. So that's one respect. And then the other thing that I would just point out is you're trying to paint a full picture of yourself through several things, right? You have your essays, you have your resume, and then you also have your reference letters, which you do not want to just kind of brush over and have them write something generic, because all of that together paints a full picture of who you are as a person. And I would say, depending on the school, they might take different weightings, but Stanford's admission committee is much more so holistic in terms of what weighs what portion. So don't think like your essay is worth more than your resume or your reference letters. They're equally important.
Thank you, Tony. Joseph.
Tony, Tony gave some really great advice. I think like you should consider a career as an MBA admissions coach. Hardest part for me, I think like probably just being really daunted by the whole process, applying to a bunch of schools, having so many different moving pieces with you have the GMAT, that'll probably be your first thing, but also, your resume, your essays, your recs, your interviews. It's just like a lot to think about and can be really, daunting, especially as you're just starting out. And so I think like personally, one thing I did was use like a Google Sheet to keep track of what are the deadlines, what are the requirements, like what is each school specifically looking for, and just trying to be as organized as possible to make sure that I felt comfortable with where I was at in the process. And admittedly, I did a lot of procrastination with the essays. So like Kevin said, they can be really, really challenging. And so just make sure you give yourself enough time for that. As for campus resources, I think you guys are in a great spot, just like coming to these events. I think that was the main thing that I utilized was the different schools will have different events that they have, that they host with Berkeley. And so just like go to those, listen to what the experiences are like of either current students or other deferred admits, listen to admissions office and see like what your school is looking for, because each school is pretty unique. And so I'd say that was like a big one. And then another one was, it really helps if you're going through this process with another friend. So I had Kevin to consistently talk to, and he was like almost always ahead of me in terms of like his essay prep and things like that. And so that really helped me make sure that I was doing the best of my ability.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to dive a little bit deeper into the application process. So Tony, you mentioned what matters most to you essay question. How did you approach it? I'm not asking you to share what you exactly write down, but just as someone who sometimes people get a minute, don't know why, but can you share some advice that would be helpful for students who may consider writing that essay apply to Stanford?
I will say I've looked at a lot of poets and quants essays on this topic, and I've seen people's essays. They are all very different. There's no rubric for this. They're genuinely trying to figure out what matters to you the most and why. And it's so simple that it's difficult to answer. For me, my first thought was like, okay, family, right? Family values really matter to me the most. But then when you dig deeper, you start to realize, okay, like the decisions I've made up to this point in my life, there's more than just family that's involved in that element, but much more so, I'm a returning student, right? So why did I choose to come back to school? Why did I transfer? Why did I apply for Berkeley? Why did I drop out of high school? Like, those are all parts of the decision-making process that made me who I am. And what mattered to me the most may have changed over time, but you start to see yourself through that storyline and pick it out and see how you think as a person. So genuinely, people are like, okay, should I show my leadership skills in this essay, or should I, throw in a bunch of high credentials? And really, the best way to approach this question is reflect upon yourself and be very genuine, because they read thousands of essays and they can sniff out in half a second if you're trying to fit a certain framework. But just be yourself in that question. Really take the time to do that exercise from the beginning to now. How have you become the person you are today? And what has guided you? What were your guiding principles in terms of what mattered to you the most? And that's how I did the essay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Kevin, you mentioned Harvard's essay. It's basically like just like ask what else, right? So they say, we have your resume, recommendation, everything like that. What else do you want us to know? Such an open-ended essay question. And then you certainly want to stand out. And then particularly like student getting into banking, they are a lot, like, right? And what is making it even harder is you have a interview reflection that needs to be submitted 24 hours after the interview. So what do you write about in those open-ended and like no question kind of prompt?
Yeah, great question, Karen. So pragmatically speaking, I wrote I also applied to Stanford and I wrote that essay first. So I took that essay and kind of like changed the language to kind of make it a bit more direct and less personal to kind of better address the HBS prompt. But like, okay, if you're not applying to Stanford, you're not doing that essay first. I think the key thing to think about is like the prompt asks you like, what more would you like them to know as they consider your candidacy, right? So really reflecting on what's already in your resume, what's already in your work experience, and really thinking about how to add a bit of a personalized touch to your application and what you want them to know beyond like what they see on paper and your hard stats. So like I kind of and this is just one way to structure it, but I kind of took it kind of chronologically to kind of really talk about kind of my background, what brought me, to this point in my life, and what kind of is my future career aspiration and how that relates to everything I've experienced so far. So I kind of talked about kind of education and how that has kind of linked all these kind of different experiences throughout my life, and how I kind of want to do something in that realm in the future, kind of combining education and kind of impact investing using my finance background. So I think just my advice there is, it's kind of similar to like the Common App when you were applying to undergrad. Just like pick a couple different experiences and link them together, or pick one like core story or experience you want to talk about. And you don't have to relate it to your future career goal, but I always think it's like a nice thing to do if you can. In terms of the interview reflection, like I think like it's like a 1-page interview reflection you write after having your interview. I think like it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. You kind of reflect on the interview, talk about like how you actually felt about it, whether you came in nervous or you were confident in some of your answers, and it's also a chance for you to expand upon like certain answers if you weren't confident or like maybe misspoke. I think like some advice for like the interview itself, which I think you should prepare more for, is like Harvard HBS's interviews are like very known to be very intense because you're actually being interviewed by like a person from the admissions committee who's like read your app like front to back, and they come in with like very like targeted questions. So you kind of have to just like practice and kind of be ready to be asked about anything. And it's a lot of like why questions, like why did you do this, or like kind of what would you change if you could go back. But yeah, that's my advice there.
Great. Thank you. Just that we are going to ask you the question about TBD. We just have Jake from the admissions officer kind of talk about what they are looking for, but we want to learn more about what your experience doing that team-based discussion. And I can imagine all those very type A students get together in a room. How would that experience look like? And again, I think Jake talked about it's not about like you suddenly need to be the leader, but how do you think that you did well in that TBD?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, so it sounds like everyone's gonna already know what the TBD is, but in case people are joining late, it's basically like you and a couple other candidates work together to solve to answer a prompt, basically. And there's someone from the admissions committee just like in the room listening. For me, it was over Zoom. I'm not sure like how they're doing it now, but I assume it's over Zoom as well, but just not sure. And yeah, it's pretty unique. It can be pretty intimidating, just the prospect of like Karen said, being with a bunch of other really type A people. But I think the best way to prepare is to do some live practice. And so like your first step will probably be to read about it online, read about like what are they looking for, what are the types of prompts, what is the whole process like, just to be familiar with it. And then after that, you'll probably want to do some live practice with some other people who are candidates or who are applying. For this, I think like, how do you stand out? Like Karen alluded to earlier, like you don't have to be the leader in the room. I would say the most important thing is that you contribute value. And so you don't necessarily want to dominate the conversation. You want to facilitate and make space for other people to be part of the conversation and contribute their own value. But you also don't want to be a wallflower either, just like sitting there silently. You want to make sure that you're willing to speak up. And when you do speak up, it's not just speaking up for the sake of speaking up, but that you're actually, bringing something to the table and making your voice heard. And Kevin actually was a big help for me in this process. And so I don't know, Kevin, do you have something you want to add to this?
Yeah, just very like I think Joseph gave some very good advice, and I think live practice is like the best thing you can do. Low key, like if you want to visualize like how this like team-based like discussion will go, it's like exactly like a case interview, like a group case interview you would have like a consulting club at Berkeley. So it's like there's like game theory involved in whether should you talk too much, should you like be an overpowering voice, or should you like kind of take a step back and let other people shine. So that's just like one way to kind of visualize it. But yeah, I mean, live practice helps. Like I prep with Joseph a bit. We prep with like other people, and I think it really helped. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think I just have one more question about more general. Share some advice that you have for students who are considering. I know in this room some are some seniors, some juniors, and I don't know other level of class. But any advice before we open up to questions? Kevin, you want to start?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I think my main piece of advice would have been to start early, but low key we're a month and a half before apps are due. So if you're a junior, start thinking about it now, and maybe start your first semester senior year. But I think like pragmatically, I think that the deferred, well, the MBA process, but also the deferred process in general, like forces you to be very like self-reflective and introspective about you and your future career goals. And like honestly, it's hard. It's hard to know what you want to do 5, 10+ years from now. But I think whether you get in or not, I think it's also helpful in terms of like longer term career planning. But yeah, I think just starting early, and I think just getting help along the way, whether it's like a friend to kind of bounce ideas off of, or to proofread your essays, or to prep for these interviews. I think it's pretty hard to do this alone. So just don't be afraid to ask for help. Use campus resources and such.
Thank you. Tony?
2 advice. One is be vulnerable throughout the process. Be you. Don't try to be some points and quants rubric through the process, because they really just genuinely want to know you. The second part is don't underestimate your referral letters. Choose your referrers wisely. Talk to them about and reflect upon the work that you've done with them. They're weighted just as heavily as your essays. So make sure that your referrers, you can trust them with the essays.
Great, thank you. Joseph?
Yeah, Kevin and Tony gave some great advice. I think one other thing I would add is just be thoughtful and intentional about, is an MBA something you genuinely want to do? Is it something you want to do within 2 to 5 years, depending on the program, maybe 2 to 4 years after graduating? Is that something you want to commit your time to in your second semester senior year? I think you just have to make all these decisions for yourself. Ultimately, there's no like objectively right answer. So just make sure before you go through this process and commit all this time and effort and energy that it's something you genuinely want to do, and be very intentional about just going through the process and choosing the schools you want to go to and all of that. So don't waste your effort if it's not something that genuinely fits like your own goals.
Great.